we would be sanctified, transformed by it, by virtue of the power and revelation that is here. It's in your Son, Jesus Christ's name, that we do pray. Amen. A young Catholic priest decided to enter a monastery. He joined one particularly strict sect. The head monk told him at his indoctrination that they were sworn to total silence. They could not speak one word at all. However, every 10 years, they would be permitted to speak 2 words. After 10 years of total silence, the head monk indicated it was now time for him to speak his 2 words. The monk said, "Bed hard." And then he resumed his silent study and work. Another 10 years passed, and the head monk again indicated it was time for him to speak his 2 words. The monk said, "Food bad." And then he resumed his silent study and work. Another 10 years passed, and the head monk indicated it was time for him to speak his 2 words. The monk said, "I quit." The head monk shook his head and said, I knew this was coming. You've done nothing but complain over the last 30 years. As we continue in our study of Numbers 11, we will see the Israelites complaining also continuing. In verse 1 through 3 of chapter 11, they complained about the hardship that they face in the desert. In verse 4, they'll complain about the food that they are eating. But in all, it will give us a chance, well, hopefully gladly, to look at our own complaining. I mean, we shouldn't misunderstand. I think we all are subject to that. We're all subject to complaining. This is not where we're pointing the finger at other people and, those complaining people. No, oftentimes it is us. And usually we have good reasons. Things don't work out oftentimes the way we want or the way they should. People often don't act the way we want or the way they should. And yes, we can find many reasons to complain, but clearly God doesn't like that because ultimately it says something about our faith in Him. See, that's the point that we really have to come to today in terms of how God even deals with the Israelites. And ultimately, as we complain, we're really making a statement about who He is and what He has done and what He would seek to accomplish. But it's also destructive to us and to the people around us. And we have to remember what one person said about complaining, and that complaining is like bad breath. We notice it far more coming from someone else than our own. So let's see what we learn about complaining in the rest of chapter 11, and hopefully even getting into chapter 12, and hopefully finding some solutions as well. So as we read, just in the first 2 verses, or 3 verses, verses 4 through 6 in chapter 11 of the book of Numbers, it says, "The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again the Israelites started wailing and said, 'If only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna.'" The first thing to make note of here in this verse is this word rabble. It's actually the only time in all of Scripture that it's used. And it means the riffraff. The mixed multitude, this group of people that followed the Jews out of Egypt but weren't part of the Jewish community. They weren't part of Abraham's children. They were people that maybe it was another slave from another nature that kind of capitalized on the fact that, hey, all these people are leaving. The Egyptians, they're kind of all mixed up in terms of all the things that have happened to them. Here's my chance. Maybe there some were Egyptians that were saying, wait a minute, if these are the people that these judgments are associated with, these plagues are associated with, the best place for me to be is with them, because who knows after they leave whether this God will continue to bring the judgments. So clearly there are people that are following the Jews, again, the riffraff, the rabble that are following, and primarily it's these people that are bringing up this issue. But then from there, the Israelites take up that chorus. And I think the point that it brings up in terms of our complaining, which is a very important thing, is how much do we let other people, particularly unbelievers, drive our attitude? How much of when we think about our complaining is that we're really joining in the complaining of other people? I mean, certainly we see this here. Again, the rabble are starting it, but then the chorus comes in terms of the Egyptians. I mean, misery loves company, so complainers will always seek an audience. They'll always seek people to join them. Again, they're always going to try and get people to follow their cause in terms of what they're thinking. But ultimately, we should know better, shouldn't we? I mean, ultimately, our knowledge of God should drive us to different things other than complaining. So don't feed into it. I mean, don't be the one that kind of joins the chorus and continues it or even makes it loud. I mean, certainly don't start it either. I'm not saying don't feed into it, but okay, it's okay if you start it. Don't do either in terms of, again, what the Scriptures tell us in terms of the destructive nature is, in terms of our faith, in terms of ourselves, in terms of our relationships. See, basically, our faith in God looks for the good in situations and in people, and it looks for productive paths and His provision. See, in other words, whenever we're looking at a bad situation or circumstances not working out a certain way or people acting in ways that, again, we didn't expect or we didn't want or we would think better or whatever it might be, understand that it's never the end of the story. That is never the end in terms of what is going on. So when we find ourselves, again, joining the harmony of complaining in terms of the situation, we're really blinding ourselves. See, if we make that the end, if we make that the only thing that's happening, the only thing that's happening is this negative thing and we need to complain about it, what we're blinding ourselves to is the work of God. It is the provision of God. It is the way that God can work in the context of things. See, ultimately, the Israelites should have known better than to complain about the very food that God had miraculously given them. When you think about what the manna represented to them, it was miraculous. Again, they're in the desert. You don't find a lot of food in the desert. There's a lot of them. And every morning, God, with the dew, is raining manna down on the camp. I mean, what a miraculous expression of God's care and His provision. The fact that He's responding to human need. He understands they're hungry, and He wants to feed that hunger. But He wants it to be a feeding that is dependent on Him, that's really based in faith. I mean, if you remember, they would collect manna just for the day. You could not collect manna and save it for the next day, because it would rot and get maggoty. But the miraculous thing that would happen is on the Sabbath, that was the only day you could have collected more. You would collect for 2 days on the Sabbath. So what would rot when it was against God's direction didn't rot when it was under God's direction. Why? Because manna was God's food. It was a food He provided. I mean, you talk about familiarity, as we saw last week, breeding contempt. That day after day after day, I'm eating this manna. All we see is this manna. Again, the first time, the fifth time, boy, it's exciting. Isn't God good? Aren't we grateful? Then all of a sudden, it becomes a bad, negative thing. And particularly as people are whispering that in your ears. Again, there's these rabble that, again, aren't connected to God in the same way that you're connected to God. They're not looking for the good. They're not looking for the purpose. They're not looking beyond the physical. I mean, when it talks about these people craving other food, there's actually, the word there is talking about fleshly desire, sinful desire. And that's what these people are prioritizing over what would be godly. And ultimately, we and the Israelites should know better when that's happening. And so therefore, we recognize that provision. But also, don't miss another aspect, another lesson about complaining that's here. One, watch out how the complaining of other people is causing us to complain. But secondly, notice here how complaining is actually corrupting their perception of things. I mean, is anyone else struck by their reinterpretation of their slavery in Egypt? I mean, basically, they're describing this like it's an all-paid vacation. Like, look, we were sitting by the Nile, we were eating fish and it came at no cost, and leeks and onions, and wasn't it all comfortable and great? Well, did you forget about the long work? Did you forget about the beating? Did you forget about the fact that you were slaves? But see, isn't that what complaining does? See, complaining looks at the moment you're in, and then what it does is it starts corrupting your mind and corrupting your perspective and making negative of this situation And then what will become tempting is now defining another situation, another time, in a more positive light. I mean, ultimately, that is Satan's game. Certainly, that's what Satan does all the time. I mean, that started in the garden. Well, like, did God really say this? No, he's really just trying to keep you from something. No, you need to be dissatisfied with this. You need to complain about this in terms of what God is trying to accomplish here and what He has provided. And so ultimately, again, it warps their thinking in terms of their perception. See, oftentimes what complaining and the kingdom of darkness will do is they make a former state, usually a state outside of God and His provision, and make that look so good. For instance, you take someone who's a drug addict or an alcoholic, and what do? They look back at the former days and say, oh, wasn't it so great? Wasn't it great when we were drinking with the buddies and we were having a good time when we went to this bar and then we went to that bar, the glory days of drinking and drugging? Yeah, forget about the fact that you destroyed yourself. Forget about the fact you destroyed your body, you destroyed your family. See, all of those things become secondary because we're complaining about something in our current context that, again, starts warping our thinking. So we need to watch out how we're complaining. Another danger of complaining that is illuminated here in the text. Really, verses 7 through 9 really express the miracle of what the manna was. It says the manna was like coriander seed and looked like resin. The people went around gathering it and then ground it into a hand mill or crushed it into a mortar. They cooked it in a pot or made it into cakes, and it tasted like something made with olive oil. When the dew settled on the camp at night, the manna also came down. So in other words, what you see here is that not only did God provide the manna, but then they found ways to cook it and prepare it and deal with it. Maybe make it in a way that was more palatable and make it more easily eaten or whatever is being described here. But just reinforcing that miracle, reinforcing the provision that was there for them, really reminding them how foolish it was that they would complain about this. Again, looking at God, looking at the one who did this miracle each and every day for them while they were in the wilderness, and ultimately looking at Him and saying, wait a minute, we want other days. We want the provisions that we had in Egypt. Particularly going to God and saying, boy, we wish we never left. I mean, what a slap in the face that is to God in terms of His direction and His provision. Now we'll look at verses 10 through 15, where we see Moses engaging with this whole situation, with the complaining of Israel. And again, we're going to glean a principle of complaining here. And it says, Moses heard the people of every family wailing, each at the entrance of his tent. It's almost like a picture that Moses is walking through the camp, and this guy's in front of his tent. Hey, wait a minute, all we have is this man. Can we get something else? This tent over here, this guy's complaining. Hey, I remember what it was like in Egypt. I remember the food we ate. And again, this chorus of complaining as he's walking through the tent. The Lord became exceedingly angry, and Moses was troubled. He asked the Lord, why have you brought this trouble on your servant? What have I done to displease you, that you put the burden of all these people on me? Did I conceive all these people? Did I give them birth? Why do you tell me to carry them in my arms as a nurse carries an infant to the land you promised on oath to their forefathers? Where can I get meat for all these people? They keep wailing to me, give us meat to eat. I cannot carry all these people by myself. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you're going to treat me, put me to death right now. If I have found favor in your eyes, and do not let me face my own ruin. So what do these verses show us? That our complaining makes it hard for others to lead. That ultimately our complaining makes it hard for other people to lead. Now, I'm not sure, again, when you think about your complaining, maybe you think about, again, that friend that has a problem with the complaining. Not your problem you have with complaining, but other people that complain. And when you think about how that oftentimes operates in the context of authority, where, again, God has established leadership in a certain context, and from that leadership would come provision, direction, information, teaching, instruction, whatever it might be. And this is on the job, this is in the family, this is in church, this is in school. And now all of a sudden this complaining is happening, but when it happens in the context of authority, now all of a sudden you're talking about how does that then affect the person that's trying to lead? And again, it becomes a negative, very negative dynamic. And ultimately, we know this, we've heard this before, but it needs to be restated. I mean, it's so easy to point out problems. It's so easy to complain and be negative. Why isn't it like this? Why do you do it this way? Boy, we used to do it that way. Or, boy, I've been in another job and we used to do it like this. All the things that you connect to in terms of negativity that then turns into a complaining that, again, makes it difficult, rather, for other people to lead. I mean, it's so easy when you're leading in that context to become frustrated. I mean, that's what's happening to Moses here. Again, he clearly was a very sensitive person in terms of caring about people, caring about their needs, internalizing the responsibility that he had. And it was as these people are talking about what they were lacking, Moses felt a personal responsibility for that. I think in some ways, maybe a little too much, but we'll get to that. But again, that's what makes it difficult. I mean, actually, one commentator actually said, and I agree, considering how stubborn and hard-hearted the Jews were, it's surprising that Moses didn't melt down more. That Moses didn't have these moments in terms of doubting himself and doubting God, doubting kind of where are we going. But see, those are the things that are created in a leader's mind, is again, as they're hearing the complaining, just hearing the negativity, that's what can happen. So what's the lesson? Don't point out a negative or have a negative complaining attitude about something you're not willing to help fix. Don't express a negative comment. Don't have a negative attitude in any context that you are then not willing to engage and to fix. To be a problem solver rather than just a complainer. Being part of the solution, not part of the problem. See, because ultimately, if there is a true problem that you're complaining about, I mean, the problem exists. Then you start complaining about the problem has just gotten bigger because now there's two problems. There's a problem that exists, and then there's the complaining that, again, is destructive to you, destructive to the relationships that are being affected by the complaining, and then for the organization or for the structure, for the leadership that is being expressed there. So when you roll up your sleeves and help, when you encourage, when you make suggestions that can then be part of those implementing it. Hey, we used to do this in another place or another Great! Help us do that here. Help us find a solution. In terms of if you have ideas, are you willing to implement them? I mean, we all know that difference. We know the difference in our own lives. We know the difference of what we've heard other people do in terms of just pointing out a problem, being the critic, being the one that is just expressing negative things, but then not doing anything constructive to fix the problem. See, that's what God is speaking against. That's what Moses is internalizing. All these people are complaining, and I'm the only one they're looking to fix it. That no one's coming to me, hey, it would be nice if you had something else. How could I help this happen? How could I pray to God? How could I help you, Moses, in terms of coordinating things or doing something rather than just standing back and complaining about it? Now, I think there's also an important point for leaders here as well. I mean, even as you confront complaining, I mean, Moses here is having a meltdown. I think it's understandable. I think it happens to us. I'm glad that the Bible is this honest. If we get to chapter 12, which I hope I do because they're very connected, but in chapter 12, God makes a statement about who Moses is. And he's saying in the context of Miriam and Aaron's rebellion against him, saying, you just have to understand how special your brother is. That I may talk to prophets in a certain way, but Moses is more than a prophet. That he, like anyone else, has personal conversation with me. And so here's this guy that is expressed to be one of maybe even the most meek person that has ever lived. All these great things that we say about Moses. But here, we have his heart exposed. We have his failure exposed. The reality of what happens to us as leaders in terms of the discouragement we feel, or are we ever going to get this done? Is this ever going to be accomplished? Are they ever going to listen to me? Are we ever going to finish this project? And there's a place that we go in leadership where, again, we can devolve into that. I think there's protection that God would have for us in that. I mean, ultimately, if you've been around me long enough, you've heard me talk about a line that I see that differentiates the difference between my activity and God's activity. And ultimately, the problem that we have in our lives as believers, and certainly in Moses' life here, is that we have to understand what is part of our responsibility, what is on our side of the line, and make sure that we're doing the things that are part of our responsibility. See, basically, we're not falling short of that line, and we're also not crossing that line. See, I think both things happen to us. I think that's what's happening to Moses. In many ways, Moses is crossing the line, and he's taking on God's responsibility and making it his own. So when he talks about, have I birthed these people? Have you told me that I need to carry them like a mother carries an infant to the promised land? No. I mean, ultimately, when you're joining God in the work that he is doing, the best part of that is he always has a greater responsibility. He always has a greater work. And so ultimately, Moses, as he internalized responsibility that is ultimately God's, again, how can he be frustrated by that? How can he freak out? How can he be, again, devolving into the state of saying, oh my God, kill me? Really, Moses? Kill me? Like, we may get there. If we get there, I've got good company. Moses said that. But ultimately, that's not the place God wants him. God would want him to lift him up from that and say, Moses, you're internalizing too much in terms of what your responsibility is. You see, the complaining that is coming from the people is now making you as the leader complain. But see, the difference between what Moses is doing is he's complaining to the right person. He's complaining to God. He's bringing it to the source. And so ultimately when we do that, that's where we find the resources. That's when we find the provision, the plan, the promise that is in our great God. The purpose in terms of what he's doing. And so therefore there's an aspect of, again, how Moses isn't depending on God for what God would promise him to do. And let that be his focus. Let that be the recourse he goes, rather than thinking about just what he's not able to accomplish. But I think on the other hand, in spite of God's provision for leadership, God's provision in terms of always being more responsible than we are, you're trying to lead a Sunday school class, you're trying to lead Sunday school, you're trying to lead Awana, lead teams, lead missions, whatever it might, wherever you are in authority in the kingdom of God, realize God is working in the context of that to support your leadership. To the extent that your leadership is good and godly, he's trying to support that leadership. He's going to make provision for that. So that is our confidence, but we also have to understand when it comes to leadership, that we do have responsibility, though. That even though we're dependent on God, and God has his resources in terms of direction and power and conviction, and the work that he's not only doing in our lives and in the situation we find ourselves, but in the lives of others as well, that there is a mantle that we carry as leaders. There is a greater responsibility. I mean, there is an aspect that would go to Moses and say, Moses, suck it up. In other words, this is the role you've been called to do. Now, God's going to support you. God is going to undergird you. God's going to strengthen you. He's going to give you the wisdom you need to be at that line. Don't cross that line. Don't take over God's responsibility. But better meet that line in terms of all the things that God is giving in terms of providing for you. You know, something that I oftentimes tell leaders is that part of what defines you as a leader is you have a passion and a vision that others don't have, and you can't expect them to have it. Like, most likely, if you're leading in a certain context, you're there because of the passion you have, because of the responsibility you internalize. And so therefore, when you look at other people that are serving, and this is work-oriented, you're the boss in the company. Of course you have the greater vision of what's to be accomplished. That's why you're the boss. What I tell people in leadership, as they might be struggling with people complaining or things are not working out, basically if you're frustrated with people that are serving with you, you can't expect them to be where you are, or there wouldn't be a need for you. Maybe take that person that is complaining the most and raise them up to take your place when you're gone. Or as a supplement or whatever it is in terms of what you're accomplishing. But again, great messages in terms of just the challenge that complaining brings to leadership, and yet ultimately the role that leaders have in terms of taking on the responsibility in terms of whatever it is that we're performing in our families, in our jobs, in our school, in ministry, in the context of the church, to avoid these pitfalls, to avoid the place that Moses is getting, but also recognizing how we who are under authority have the opportunity, have the responsibility in terms of God's economy to not be ones that are drawing away, that are complaining, that are being negative, and ultimately exacerbating the problem. So basically in 16 to 20, we see the solution. We see God hearing both the Israelites and the people. And so the Lord said to Moses, "Bring me 70 of Israel's elders, who are known to you as leaders and officials among the people. Have them come to the tent of meeting, that they may come stand there with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and will take of the Spirit that is on you, and put the Spirit on them. They will help you carry the burden of the people, so that you will not have to carry it alone. Tell the people, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed. If only we had meat to eat, we were better off in Egypt. Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it. You will not eat it for just 1 day, or 2, or 5, or 10, or 20 days, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and you loathe it, because you rejected the Lord who is among you, and have wailed before him, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt?" It's funny. When you bring a problem to God, it's just interesting how he solves it. In this situation, he's saying, yeah, you want meat? Great, I'm going to give you meat. But because you asked for that in a complaining mode, that you were expressing the lack that you had in my unfaithfulness or my lack of awareness, whatever it was about defiance and disobedience, you know something? I'm going to give you meat, but you're going to eat it for so long that ultimately it's going to become a negative thing to you. This is representative to me of Romans 1, where Romans 1 gives a picture of people that, again, they understand who God is, they see his power, they see his nature, they see his authority, but they defy him as God, and ultimately start doing things in terms of their nature, in terms of their behavior, that's completely inconsistent with the natural course of things. And what does God say? I gave you over to that desire. Okay, you want to defy me? Then go for it. Now, I do believe there's a gracious provision in that. That ultimately, because I find myself wishing that for other people, that ultimately, if you're on a destructive path, I want that destructive path heightened. I want you to know the nature of that destruction, the consequences of that destruction, the discipline of that destruction, sooner rather than later. Because the sooner you understand the destructive pattern, the negative consequences that come, the sooner you can repent, the sooner you can be enlightened, sooner you can be convicted. And so for me to languish in lukewarmness, to languish in this middle road, to languish in this, I'm following this course that's away from God, and I'm just going to try and keep both feet in. Yeah, something, you do that for years and your life is wasted. I think that's part of the reason why God says, I'd rather have you hot or cold. That at least if you're cold, you won't convince yourself that you're hot. But if you're lukewarm, you're saying, hey, it's pretty warm in here. I can convince him, I'm doing a little bit with God. I'm in touch with him and his provision. I'm not defying him in any way. But you really are. Because again, you're not feeding from the very thing God has given you to feed from. And see, and don't miss that. Again, the main thing that I think we glean from this passage is how God internalizes this as you have defied me. You have rejected me. This is not about food. This is not about Moses. This is not about your situation. This is about my relationship with you. And so ultimately, as your God, as your Lord, I need to teach you some things. See, once you put something in God's hand and say, God, provide this for me. Have your will be done. Okay. Well, I'm going to provide it for you, but I'm going to probably teach you a lesson in the process. I'm going to take advantage and take the opportunity to instruct you in the context of this. And that's exactly what's happening. But don't miss the issue. Is again, you reject because you have rejected the Lord at the end of verse 20. And your rejection is expressed in, why did we ever leave Egypt? I mean, do you know what Egypt represents in God's economy? In terms of the miraculous work, the powerful expression of his character, all the things he wanted to magnify the people, magnify himself through the experience of the Jews in Egypt, and you're going to corrupt that? You're going to go around and the sentiment and the attitude of the Israelites, we wish we were back in Egypt after all I did for you? After all that represents in terms of the forward testimony of you glorifying me to the nations, and we're grateful for a God who's freed us from Egypt, that stopped all that slavery, that brought us to a promised land. And you're going to be saying, I want to go back there? No, we need to rid that from the camp, God is saying. That has to be stopped. Let's put a period right on that and realize that is not going to go here. Because that testimony of Egypt and what it is just too important in terms of what God is accomplishing. And so again, God will, let me just say this. I could say it later. I may say it later again too. But as I look at this judgment, as I look at God again, putting it in your face that you think you know what you want, well, let me give you what you want, because then you're gonna recognize the destruction that's in it. It's going to become destructive to you. That we have to recognize that there is a nature in us that will only respond to that. Or something, I can't talk about you. I'll just talk about me for a moment. There is an aspect of the nature in me, in terms of its rebellion, its defiance, its pride, that shakes its fist at God, that the only thing that will humble it is this judgment that comes from God. Is a standard that God has that says, again, you don't mess with me. And there are places you can go where you will come up against a wall, and the wall will win. And see, part of us responds to mercy and grace and love, and God accepts me. And maybe you have a nature that's what you need. And you love God, and you follow God, you obey God because of all that. But I know for myself, there's an aspect of my nature that needs the thumb of God pressing me down, because if I'm not driven to my knees, I won't be on my knees. Now that's not a nature I want to live in. Hopefully you don't see that nature all that much. My family probably sees that nature far more than you do. But again, that's what I'm dying to. That's what I reckon dead. That's what I am being sanctified from. But I recognize there's an aspect of that nature when I think about the balance that is in God's character in terms of His love and His mercy, His acceptance and His grace. The balance that is in His judgment and that is in His wrath that humbles me before Him. I mean, basically, as we move on, maybe get into chapter 12. But Moses said, here I am among 600,000 men on foot, and you say, I will give them meat to eat for a whole month. Would they have enough if flocks and herds were slaughtered for them? Would they have enough if all the fish in the sea were caught for them? The Lord answered Moses, is the Lord's arm too short? You will now see whether or not what I say will come true. See, these verses right here are the exact expression that I'm talking about that line. And Moses is crossing the line. What? You expect me to do this? And God would say, no, I don't. So if you're thinking, Moses, if part of what you're burdened by as a leader, well, what is affecting you in terms of the meltdown you're having, if you think I'm expecting you to do that, I'm not. And that's something we have to assess in terms of our lives when we're having those meltdowns, when we're thinking, boy, am I internalizing a responsibility that really is God's responsibility? So just to hear God say, Moses, do you think I can't do this? Do you remember those plagues? Remember the flies and the boils and the blood and the gnats and all those other ones? Just not coming to mind. You see, if you know them good, so you're thinking about. But anyway, he would point to that and say, like, do you think the God that accomplished that couldn't do this? Like, are you saying my arm is too short? I mean, how often do we tell God, yeah, God, your arm is too short. You can't affect this, you can't change this, you can't do this. We need to watch that. And then I just think, I love God's relationship with Moses, where he just says in a fatherly way, hey, you know something? You've just categorized, you've taken a responsibility that's not your own. Let me take that for you, and then let me show you what I'm going to reveal to you that shows you who I am. So as you're leading Israel, you'll have the confidence in me of who I am and not in yourself. And I think that's what's happening in that interaction. So Moses went out and told the people what the Lord had said. He brought together 70 of their elders and had them stand around the tent. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke with him, and he spoke of the Spirit that was on him, and put the Spirit on the 70 elders. When the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied, but they did not do so again. However, 2 men, whose names were Eldad and Medad, had remained in the camp. They were listed among the elders, but did not go out to the tent. And the Spirit also rested on them, and they prophesied in the camp. A young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Joshua, son of Nun, who had been Moses' aide since you spoke up to Moses, my Lord, stop them! But Moses replied, are you jealous for my sake? I wish that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit on them. Then Moses and the elders of Israel returned to the camp. Boy, what a neat story in terms of, God's provision for Moses. We have to remember that this happened once before, but not for the same purpose. If you remember when Moses' father-in-law Jethro came to visit him and said, hey, Moses, you're having all these people come to you to try cases in terms of who's right and who's wrong, and you're making all these judgments on cases. You shouldn't do that. You should appoint 70 people to join you in terms of the responsibility you're carrying. We have to understand, this is a different 70 people for a different purpose. That we can assume that because that's, Exodus, that's around Sinai, that Jethro is having that conversation, that those 70 are operating in terms of hearing casing and making judgment, kind of a judicial function. This is more a pastoral function. This is more when ministry needs to happen, when hurts are happening, when needs are being expressed, in terms of not conflict, but in terms of just the lives of the Israelites, these 70 people. And to notice that part of God's provision for us as leaders, even for us as individuals, again, as we address our complaining, is that people coming together to help really works on both ends. In other words, when we think of leadership, when we think about, again, the challenge that exists for us as leaders in the context of a complaining workforce or people that are under us, that to realize that part of God's provision is to bring people along with us to help us with that process, to help us with whatever we're accomplishing. And so that's part of God's wisdom. Our relationships are part of God's wisdom. It's part of God's provision. But what's neat, even as you think about being part of the rabble that's complaining in terms of any situation, see, what I think this gives us a picture of is rather than being part of a complaining entity, why not become part of a group of people that is a helping entity? That ultimately we're getting together, and this group is about helping leadership, helping leaders do things better. And then that way, things get done better. I mean, leadership is helped because they have the resource and they have the people surrounding them. Like Moses had, he said, hey, 70 guys to help me with this, filled with God's Spirit. Awesome. That's a help to him. But see, it's also helpful to the complaining people because needs are addressed. You're actually removing, hopefully, part of the need for complaining because work is being done and provision is being made for them. So when we think about, again, the lesson that we would have in terms of our relationships, in terms of the leadership we may have, or the way we function in the context of a situation, coming together in terms of those relationships and seeing how that is a provision of God. Noticing that you cannot stop the Spirit. I love that in terms of the fact that Eldad and Medad are in another part of the camp. And see, because you're on the list, you get the Spirit. The Holy Spirit is not location-based. It's not based, okay, the only way the Spirit can work is if you're in this context. If God intended for you to be there and for some good, it has to be some good reason. It's not, I don't want to walk over to the tent, or I'm lazy, or I'm defiant. No, it's probably, my wife is sick, or who knows what caused them not to be there. But it had to be a legitimate reason in God's economy, the way God would look at it. But when that's the case, when their willingness is there, their obedience is there, then therefore location doesn't matter. And that's the power of the Spirit. That's the influence of the Spirit in terms of what God is revealing and just the nature of His power. And Moses saying that I welcome that. But would everyone have the Spirit? And in thinking, another thought that I have on my notes here is just recognizing the privilege we have as believers that we have the Spirit. See, noticing that when it comes to the Old Testament, and when it comes to the people of Israel, each person did not have the Holy Spirit. Basically, it was only by virtue of their role or their responsibility that they were given the Holy Spirit. But we as believers in Jesus have the Holy Spirit. So let's at least finish chapter 11 so we can say that is done. Because I know you're dying to hear just what happened as far as this quail coming out of their noses. Now a wind went out from the Lord and drove quail in from the sea. It brought them down all around the camp to about 3 feet above the ground, as far as a day's walk in any direction. All that day and night, and all the next day the people went out and gathered quail. No one gathered less than 10 homers. Then they spread them out all around the camp. But while the meat was still between their teeth, and before it could be consumed, the anger of the Lord burned against the people, and He struck them with a severe plague. Therefore the place was named Kibroth Hattaavah, because there they buried the people who had craved other food. From Kibroth Hattaavah, the people traveled to Hazeroth and stayed there. There's a couple things to internalize from this. One is this is the miraculous provision of God. This is God's hand not being too short. See, don't miss the provision and the miracle that's here. Just because there's judgment on the other side, don't miss the fact that as Moses is asking God, how are you going to do this? How can we accomplish this? Are we supposed to slaughter all the animals in Israel? No, that's not the way we're going to do it. I'm going to do it this way. And I'm going to make it easy in terms of the provision that happens. When it says the 2 homers are collected, that would be enough meat to eat for a month. And so again, God is doing the miracle. He's providing the very thing that people are asking for. But again, because in their attitude, because of what they were bringing this need to God in the basis of what it was conditioned by and what it flowed from. It flowed from their defiance. It flowed from their disobedience. It flowed from their rejection of God, particularly in terms of seeking to go back to Egypt. And I think that is why the judgment comes. But again, I think that is part of what we need in terms of our understanding of who God is, the condition of our hearts towards Him in terms of generating obedience and worship before Him. Something, let me do this, because I was hoping to get through chapter 12, but then at the end of that, mention what we do, what God provides for us in terms of complaining. So let me cover those, at least one of those things first, or get as far as I can, because it's also good to kind of end on a good note. See, when we talk about in this passage the destructiveness of complaining, the fact that God is clearly against that. Do you get that point? That God doesn't like complaining. So therefore, if you care about what God thinks, you don't want to complain. Well, I think 3 things come into play in terms of us not complaining. What helps us not complain? And the first thing is that in any situation we are in, there are always more good things than there are bad things. There's a hymn that talks about count your blessings, name them one by one. Yeah. Count your many blessings, see what God has done. I mean, there are always more good things. See, complaining focuses on the negative and blinds us to the positive. And what we need to understand as thankful, appreciative people that are oriented to the good things that God has provided, that overcomes the complaining. I mean, basically, we find, or you will find, is that if you're a negative person, you can find negative things in good things. And if you're a positive person, you'll find positive things in bad things. But it's what you're oriented to. And the first thing, again, there's always more good things than bad things. The fact that the sun came up this morning is a good thing, right? But I mean, that's so many things work from your eyes still work, your heart beats, so many good things that we just miss in terms of familiarity that we need to, can be a defense against our complaining. The second thing is that God is always up to something. See, if we understand that God is working together for the good, for those who love God and are called to His purpose, don't miss those, love God and are called to His purpose, anything in your life that is outside of God's order, outside of God's wholeness, outside of what God desires, you can understand that God is working to bring it to wholeness. That's a confidence you can have. In terms of your wife doesn't respect you, your husband is in sin, your child is defying you, people aren't being saved, your work for the gospel doesn't seem to be anything in terms of what God would desire in your life. He is always working behind the scenes to bring it to completion, to bring it to wholeness, to bring it to His will. And see, to me, that is one thing we cling to in terms of what makes me positive in any situation. What is God doing here? What can God accomplish even in the midst of a bad situation? What is He doing to work for the sake of His kingdom, for the sake of myself, to accomplish things, to bring it in accordance to His will? See, to me, there is great hope, there is great faith, there is great peace, there is great patience generated in the idea that, again, God is always doing something. And so, therefore, to me, that makes it less necessary to complain. I think the third thing that we've already seen is be a fixer. In the presence of your complaining, think about how instead of complaining, you can fix a situation. And for that, I love the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. There's great wisdom there in terms of, again, you take the serenity prayer and put it in your complaining, and complaining doesn't work. Because ultimately, if you're complaining about something that you can't fix, you can't correct, and you're just complaining about it, guess what? It's not for you to change anyway. So give me the courage to accept the things I can't change. Or the serenity to accept the things I can't change. And then when it comes to things I can change, there's always a path. There's always a good thing to do. There's always a work that I can do. See, as I talk about God always being up to something, we can always be up to something too. I can be praying a prayer. I can be giving a word. I can be giving encouragement. I can be directing in terms of what role God would have me to bring about that wholeness, to bring about His will in any situation. See, you start focusing on those things rather than complaining, being a fixer, seeing what God would have for you in terms of the work that you do. Again, you will find there's not a need for complaining, and that complaining will actually change. And as the complaining changes, as the words change, the heart will change, your motivation will change, your ministry for Christ will change, because people will see a light coming from you that is about who He is, what His kingdom is accomplishing, rather than you and what you're perceiving in terms of all this negative in your life. Let's bow and let's pray. Father, for a couple of weeks we really have talked about this whole idea of complaining. And clearly it's something that you're against. And you give us the power to fix. That you give us the perspective to not be complaining people. To not be murmurers in terms of the places that we find ourselves both in the church and in our lives. And so Father, I just pray for your conviction to follow your word, in terms of all the things that you're seeking to instruct us in, pinpoint in terms of our lives, how we fall into these patterns, how we fall complaining of other people. And Father, help us to be beacons of your light, beacons of your truth, beacons of hope and peace and patience, encouragement, love, kindness, mercy. Father, help us to find the good
that you intend to accomplish in any situation, and pray and live to those ends. It's in your Son, Jesus Christ's name, that we do pray. Amen.
Amen.